Hello. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Asian Paints Color Next presentation. I'm going to start with a small prayer to the digital gods that we remain online without any glitches over the next 2 hours or so. In case there is a problem, rest assured that we have an emergency, in case of emergency, standby person on the side, but fingers crossed that we don't come to that. Firstly, thank you all so much for devoting your Sunday afternoon to us. For Asian Paints, this is one of the most important events of the year. For almost 2 decades now, Asian Paints has produced Color Next, which presents the company's color forecasts for the entire year. The process involves months of research, exploring cultural and social shifts, interviewing experts in various fields. The research really looks at socio-cultural sentiments and behavioral changes. There are workshops, presentations, and many, many, many meetings. But of course, all of that sort of changed last year. As with everything else, we were forced to change the way we did things. But of course, we've adapted, and we couldn't have imagined that our Color of the Year presentation would be entirely digital in 2021, but here we are. So the structure for today is pretty simple. We have 5 keynote speakers, and each speaker represents work that is connected with each of our 4 themes for the year. And we will have a conversation at the end of each presentation so that we can really explore the relationship between the trend and the practice that each speaker represents. So now I'm going to start off by doing a little introduction of our key speakers for today, starting with Alan Abraham. Alan is the joint principal architect of Abraham John Architects, which is a multidisciplinary architecture, interior design, landscaping, and urban planning firm. His body of work includes architectural and interior projects, high-end residences, offices, and many charitable works, including earthquake and cyclone-proof buildings in many parts of the country. Customization and sustainability are driving forces of their practice, and Alan will be speaking on one of the trends today. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Ekta Parikh, the co-founder of Red Architects. Ekta Parikh has worked in varied environments of small design studios and large-scale corporate spaces, both in Mumbai and New York. Her experience ranges from building projects like residential complexes in bungalows and hotels to infrastructural projects, bridges, interior projects in the healthcare, retail, and hospitality industry. Then comes Samuel Barclay, co-founder of Case Design. Sam has practiced in Los Angeles with Studio Works Architects before moving to India in 2006 to work with Studio Mumbai. In 2013, he co-founded Case Design with his wife, Erica Barclay, and it's a practice that's rooted in India, engaging in collaborative design processes to create spaces and objects of all scales, deep human interactions and the shared environment. Sorry, is there an echo? Okay, so I will take that slowly till the tech team can sort that out. Our last speaker of the day will be Chaitanya Dikshit. He's popularly known as Shay. He has established himself as a leader, or as some say, the god of sneaker customizations. He started his journey in 2018 with the first pair of custom Vans speakers, and that's led to collaborations with Reebok, Fila, Adidas, Puma, Veg, Non-Veg, and Super Kicks. And he considers himself an artist, and we are very excited to have him on board to speak about one of the trends. The last key speaker that I want to introduce to you guys is Mr. Amit Singhal. He is the CEO and MD of Asian Paints. If there is one person here who knows Color Next inside out, and with an archival knowledge of all the colors that have ever been colors of the year, it is Amit. So it is, of course, it's my pleasure to invite him on now to tell you what we mean when we say Color Next, the process, the thinking behind it, and to reveal the trends for 2021. Amit?
Thank you, Manju, for that introduction. And I think it's a pleasure to be amongst you all. And who would have imagined that we are virtually connected today, and in this colorful world. I think it is now we have to live with the digital colors which we see for ourselves this year. But I think it's great to be presenting to you our journey of the Color Next 2021. And I'm sure you will be excited in terms of hearing what the design trends are and what do we have in store for you. So if I look at the overall trend research today, what we try is that, given the fact that we've been working on this for the last 2 decades, we have fine-tuned the research so as to say that we are not only in terms of entrenched in terms of what the Indian trends are, but we also looked at informing us what's really happening globally. And that's something which is a strong part of the research. We also look at in terms of aligning with lots of thought leaders and opinion leaders who would kind of really guide us in this process in terms of looking at that it is not that we are talking of some of the trends by gut, but there is a trigger and there is a background in terms of why we are talking about that trend really coming up. Obviously, I think we look at observing what's the change which is happening in the social fabric at home, because that's a very, very important input which comes in. And that's how it kind of leads to the design trends of 2021, which we now call as the Color Next 2021. So that's the background. But I think before we really jump into the trends, I wanted to kind of cover what are the larger movements, what are the larger design trends which we are seeing. And I call it as more as the larger design movements which are happening around us. One of the key things which we have always seen is the role of the maker. And I think there is a time now what is happening is that we are really celebrating the artisan, and the handmade rawness in products is appreciated much more. Upskilling artists across categories from fashion, product design, and even paint industry are finding value in this. And therefore, there is an appreciated charm in the handmade and handmade goods over the industrial large mass production which we see, and that is possibly defining the new face of luxury. So that's, I think, a larger thing which is happening, which is very, very important. The second big thing in terms of what we are also seeing is this whole area of the conscious consumption. And that's something which is coming very, very strongly given the year what we have seen, because what we are seeing is people are moving away from the throwaway culture and looking for more sustainable way to consumerism. And today, what we see, like one of the works of the, one of my favorite artists, Yazid Contractor, the son of the premier architect Hafiz Contractor, who has gone a totally diametrical opposite way in terms of what he has been doing. And he has been really collecting, channels of steel which go into the structure, looking at, the PVC pipes and looking at the neon tubes and so on and so forth, and really constructing something which is really strong and giving, really an expression to imagination. And it is all about upcycling, creating art out of the ordinary materials in a very, very unconventional way. So I think that's another big movement in terms of what we are seeing on our way. The third area is about the whole area of the discerning consumer. Consumer demand is for now personalization and customization to find their unique voice in their lives through design. They ask now us to diversify in terms of more many things, and they want themselves to be inclusive and adaptive in that process. So what we are seeing is the emergence of something which is far more empathetic design, and that is something which we see in this discerning consumer coming in a big way. And finally, another thing which is very close to my heart is this whole area of building a close-knit community. a resettlement site transforms into a vibrant district in Kanagi Nagar, Chennai. Public art of this scale gives the people of the community a new identity and pride in belonging to the society. So it is not about beautiful places for the elite, but joyful places across the spectrum. So I think that's another very, very big thing. And Asian Paints has been doing a lot of work in this area, looking at democratizing of art and taking public spaces all across. And we've looked at almost about 25 cities, which we have been able to kind of do as we have kind of moved ahead this year. So that brings me on to saying that at the backdrop of this larger movements, what's the Color Next 21 in terms of what we have been doing? This entire thing started in 2003, and we've now been, at it for the last about 17 to 18 years. And over a period of time, we think we have now fine-tuned the process so that we can say that it's not a perfect science, but we can say it's not only about art and gut in terms of what we are talking of. So the process involves really kind of looking at the larger socioeconomic trends which are happening in the country. Based on that, we look at what are the lifestyle changes which are happening in and around. And based on lifestyle changes, what are the larger decor themes which are having. And once we know the larger decor themes, then we start looking at the emerging color palettes. And that's how the entire Color Next 2021 really comes to shape. And in this, what we have started looking at is that it is not only about color. It is something which we now call as the CMFT, which is the color, material, finishes, and texture. So how the trend kind of really evolves that, because what we feel is that material, texture, and finish is a very, very strong part which can be adapted for any design as we kind of look forward in terms of going. And that's the kind of backbone in terms of the overall design trend in terms of what we speak of. So the process is fairly kind of involved, and it takes us about almost close to about 6-8 months. And this year it was far more challenging because a lot of it basically went into the digital medium to that extent. And we looked at almost strong number of digital interactions all across, aligning with designers, aligning with opinion leaders, aligning with people who are looking at in terms of the larger changes happening across the country. We had multiple collaborative workshops and finding the design relevance to these trends. And in these things, we also looked at, a competent team at Asian Paints coming together along with designers, looking at, really creating, a sense in terms of what the trend is and looking at what are the colors which would kind of really come into play to that extent. What we can talk of is the Color Next palette as we look at 2021. So I think the whole process is pretty involved in terms of how it comes about. And that is something which is the adrenaline of the game in terms of what it is there. So having gone through an year which has been, I would say unprecedented, really, I think in 2021, the need is to keep ourselves motivated completely and look at a very, very positive outlook for the year ahead. And as we see, for us, design industry is the fuel of a society, and it is a lot of onus on us how we keep this entire movement up and keep on really motivating people in terms of what the next year is going to be. So today, I'm right now on to the saying that what are the trends for the year 2021? I'm sure all of you are excited to see in terms of what the trends are. I'm going to speak of 4 design stories today for you and really look at evolving what those stories are and how do they really impact design and what is the trend which is emerging out of that. So let's have the first habitat trend, AV. So what you saw was a small peep into the trend habitat. Habitat is a story of coexistence and humility, of pausing and observing the world around us. It is time for now that we look at in a very, very systematic way that how do we look at a rethink in terms of looking at how we can exist and coexist with this world. You know, the entire trigger of this trend really comes in from what we have gone through the pandemic and the effect on lifestyle, behavior, and the mindset. As per me, the key words which really kind of come out of this trend are about coexistence, pragmatism, the whole area of optimism and empathy. Let's look at in terms of how the color palette looks here. A very, very interesting color palette, which is warm. It's about compassion. It's earthy there, which, we have a Deccan earth kind of a shade there. It's a bit weathered, but at the same time, it is optimistic, which comes in. So I think it has got a very, very interesting palette, which really comes out, which is basically talking of the trigger in terms of what this entire palette is all about. And when we look at the textures and patterns here, the pattern here, what is the desert legend which you see here, is something which is symbolic of coexistence with the various elements of nature. And the texture is something which is really kind of giving us a view into visually tactile textures. And what is on display is something what we call as the Teodorico. And it's something which is really very, very calming, but at the same time, it has a tactile kind of nature in terms of what comes to it. Here is that where we will look at possibly looking at, something which is called a product innovation coming out of the habitat as a design manifestation. And what you see in the slide for yourself is a portable propulsion device that has been clipped onto the front fork of a bicycle. So that basically it is something which is using as a propulsion technique without the use of any tools. So something which we are existing very, very plainly with the environment and looking at utilizing what is there. Now, another example, which is something which is really brilliant in terms of what comes out, is this whole architecture and space, which is the Ras Chhatra Sagar, which is there done by the Lotus Studio. It's something which is really fantastic in terms of, how they have looked at really kind of balancing everything here. The sensitive ecological context of the site is imperative, because what we see is that today, the Studio Lotus has put this entire system on low impact foundations, and something which is what we see as lightweight superstructures for the newest iteration in terms of the hospitality which they have created. So something which they have really constructed with really the mind in terms of the coexisting literally with the environment in a very strong manner. We look at the clear decor directions which emerge for this kind of a zone. As one can see, it's all about, not about only the lifestyle, but about the life cycle. The design is very, very empathetic, yet innovative, because it is using a lot of natural materials, looking at outdoor lighting as a fair share which is coming, and a natural ventilation which comes into it, giving rise to a decor which is so calming, soothing, very strongly earthy, and coexisting with the environment in a very, very strong manner. So I think that's the story of the design trend habitat in terms of what we speak of. And having created this, let's look at our first keynote speaker, Alan Abraham, who's going to speak about urban planning for a better future. Over to Alan.
Thanks, Amit. Pleasure to speak here, and thank you everyone for coming on a Sunday afternoon. That's really nice. So we can have the slides and I'll just speak about it. So we have architecture, which kind of is our practice. And then we also have interiors, which we do for bread and butter in Bombay. And of course, paint is used all over there. But we also, indulge ourselves in urban design. We kind of do up nice houses when we step out into the urban realm. It's kind of sad. So what we decided to do is set up something called the Bombay Greenway. It's been over 10 years now. And we kind of look at spaces within Bombay, which we can just improve by small means. So I think you've got an image of, we can just play the images. That's okay. I'll just keep it going. We have this space in Bandra called Mount Mary, on which there were some steps which were unused. It was a drug addict infested place. It was unknown to most of the residents over there. And what we did through a series of interventions is we created public spaces, staircases, ramps, made it universally accessible, activated the space through paint, through color. You can keep the slides going. That's an example of an installation. Actually, these are all the finished images. These are images of people involving themselves, community, the local community, in painting and improving the space. So basically, what happened here was we created 120 meter by 12 meter wide public space, which could be used by everybody. On the DP, it's designated as a road. It's not a road. There's steps. They were a little doubtful about whether it could actually be steps. I said, you build it and you see, and then if you don't like it, you can make it a road. You can't really navigate that kind of thing. So the good part is there are no gates opening onto it. It's totally pedestrian. It's safe for kids. It's accessible by the handicapped, and it's used by everyone from like a 1-year-old to a 100-year-old. So it's truly, something that's a shot of the steps under construction. So what we've got a lot in the city through nature itself. We've got like a lot of trees. We've got everything actually above 6 feet is pretty beautiful in Bombay. It's the bottom that kind of gets messy, where the roads are bad, and you have like the traffic, and you have all these other things that are kind of induced problems. They're not problems per se, but they're induced by the demand that's created by the supply, and so on and so forth. People encourage parking on roads, and what happens eventually is that parking takes over roads, you have traffic problems, and then you end up with roads without any kind of footpaths. When you end up without footpaths and only parking, you end up with unsafe streets. When you end up with unsafe streets, you end up with zero interaction. So it's totally diametrically opposite to what we used to have in the past, where you interacted with all the street vendors, you saw different colors, you saw different people, you had a good, rich street experience. Today's streets are sterile. The fancier the building, the more sterile. And you get cities that get disconnected totally along the edge. So what happens then is now you need a car to go from place A to place B, where you could have easily walked. And when you walk, you start appreciating the smaller things. Like some people smell flowers. We don't really have flowers in Bombay. So we have installations. So we have like Christmas trees that we create, and like follies that we create, so we can have people interact with the sculpture. We have art on the walls. We have spaces where people can dance. There's drum circle, people are doing parkour and hula hoops, and you have children doing art. People are drawing on the road, people are drawing on the walls, and these are things that we encourage actively. We don't want a place to have a list of no-nos, like you can't walk here, you can't run here, you can't play with the ball here, you can't do this, which is commonplace to all parks. Unfortunately for us, this place is on the DP, as I mentioned before, designated as a road. So that works out really fine, because if it was under gardens, it would be locked up. So the irony of something that probably we'll discuss later, Manju, is what happens to open spaces during a pandemic. Are they really open? They were closed down, so on and so forth. The irony is that the roads are true open spaces, right? And the roads are the only places that were open, and people, when they wanted to get out, got out in their car, in their little bubbles, and went out on the roads. Yeah, and the gardens, which could have been the respite areas, which could have been the areas for breathing, were unfortunately locked up. So, so this is one of the few projects that we've initiated, one of the smaller ones. We've got projects ranging from this to trying to intervene with the future disasters, which is basically Bombay kind of has this mentality that we don't have enough space. The fact is we do. We just don't use the space well, which is why architects are important. We use space well, all of us. And we should be having a bigger role in society to create it. So this government actually just thinks that you need to reclaim land from the sea, then build roads on the sea. And that's the idea of development. Unfortunately, big projects are the idea of development. They don't enhance your day-to-day life at all. They don't like kind of improve your quality of life. And especially if you're just driving from place A to place B, you can't even enjoy that space because ideally your eye should be on the road. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is trying to intervene in those projects that are the big ticket projects now, and trying to, just by realignment and small changes, keep our waterfront more intact and get people more in touch with their natural surroundings. Because even Bombay has a lot of nature. We've got hills, river, lakes, the biggest natural forests in any big city in the world. We've got the sea on the east coast, the west coast. So from sunrise to sunset, we've got ports which are inaccessible. So it's sad, but otherwise we could have a great waterfront. So there's plenty of scope in Bombay. It's brilliant. It's got great people. It just needs a little better governance and city involvement. So yeah. And I think most of the colors which I've just seen Amit kind of take out there as color of the year, the colors of nature. I mean, I can see earth there, I can see leaves there, I can see, the sea there. So it's really nice because you get these colors in the natural context. Yeah. And I think it's something that we should all enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. So we're going to have Amit, Alan, and myself. And so, Alan, I wanted to ask you, the Bombay Greenway project has a sort of activistic feeling to it. So I was wondering, what was the impetus for you to start? Because it's such a big departure from what your practice does with what you call the bread and butter projects.
Yeah, bread and butter is very, very important.
Very important. Yeah,
very agree. Important because you need to be able to fund the other things you do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
But was there a moment when something you guys decided that you wanted to start it?
So my wife Anka, she's not from India originally. She's from Romania. So when she came down from France, she was studying there. She came down and she heard us grumbling about heard me basically grumbling, because grumbling is what one does normally, right? You grumble about things. Oh, this is so easy to change. You can do this, you can do that. So she was like, shut up and do it, So it was like pretty easy. So then you stop talking and you start doing. So instead of being a guy who grumbles or a person who complains, we're not complainers. Even now, we're not complaining. We're complaining because we love the city, but then we're not complaining without a solution. What we do is we give a proactive solution. We don't go to the government and say, what you're doing is crap, because we think it's crap, because we know it's crap. We need to provide them with an alternative. Because otherwise, what merit does our argument have? You have to say that, okay, this is not good enough, but maybe this can be better. And you don't have to be paid for it, because actually we're paying for these projects. So it's actually the other way around. We should be thinking of ourselves as the clients who are getting the city from the tax money that we spend. Okay, we're sharing the space. So we should be altogether kind of as demanding as we would be as any of our clients are when they, want a good project from us. Okay. So we are like, rather than activists, I would say we are architect clients kind of begging for a better place.
So, as you alluded to earlier, 2020 changes this notion of what we have about outside space and inside space. There are two, there's one great irony to Bombay itself, which is the tradition. For so long, the average Bombay apartment, anyone who lives in the average Bombay apartment tries to increase the amount of space by, say, taking in the balcony, making an apartment out of literally the entire space that they could possibly get. So how does what happened in 2020 change when people don't have access to the outside, when they're so desperate for nature within the home? And how do you, as a designer, how do you adapt to this new situation?
Okay, so first thing is balconies are enclosed. That's like the norm. So what the government does is it says no more balconies. Okay, now all the FSI is calculated. So now the builders make all the houses without balconies. Okay, and then everyone's locked up. Now suddenly everyone realizes, oh, I wish we had a balcony. So then you're going back, like it's a cycle. And then you see these Italian and Spanish guys like playing things from the balconies. Then people have to do dias and all, whatever. So you have this whole thing happening where the government, I think, went through the DCR, you can mandate that there has to be some open space for each person, because pandemics might repeat in future also. Now, if you're taking a lot of stringent action on other things, one of the things could be in the DCR, in the development control, where you can say, you know, new buildings should have balconies. It's compulsory that people have access to an open space while being locked up. Yeah. The other thing is, unfortunately, they shut down all the parks. Now, they thought maybe it'll be crowding, but heck, people really need to get out, because we have a density issue also, where people are packed into houses. So they need to get out. So, but overall, the roads are the only things that are open, that were always open. You could drive, you could move around, you could walk on the road. And what happened is, a lot of people turned to either like COVID things, like people started selling sanitizers, all our vendors, sanitizers to everything else, or they became grocers. So suddenly you had an influx of grocers, because grocery was an allowed profession and people needed to work. So everyone started vegetable mongering, you know. So you had all these grocery shops happening, and those became the places where people interacted. So I think at an urban level, you need to look at like markets, schools. I mean, there's no reason schools should have been shut down. All schools should have, most schools now don't have, unfortunately, open spaces within the school. So a Shantiniketan kind of model where you have outdoor schooling could have been easily adopted. I mean, especially in the winter months here. You know, you could use gardens as schools. I mean, you do need physical activity, you need social interaction. You can't give away everything, and you know, it's not an emergency kind of thing. It's something that's health related, and social interaction is mental health related, and physical interaction is physical health related. I mean, and so in this, you know, in the fear of COVID, we've lost all the other factors. So it's kind of very negative, really. But I think they should wake up now and smell the coffee. And private clients, oh, they love second home. So we're getting lots of second home inquiries. So that's, I think, where you were getting at. But that's like the bottom of the chain for me, because that's the bread and butter thing. Yeah, you choose and pick, and then.
But have their requests been changing? I mean, do you see any, you know?
Yeah, a few people want like a quarantine room and like a drop-off room and like a stockpile room. So you have those things, and you have the home office happening. So the requirements are ballooning. I think if people look at apartments now, they look at apartments if it's affordable with these kind of requirements.
Okay.
And but we're looking at the creme, no? The kind of people we're servicing also is like, who hires architects? Only like most people will go and buy the paints directly. So so I mean,
which brings me to you, Amit. How does a company like Asian Paints then deliver something more to its customer in this kind of a scenario? I mean, we've gone from pure wall coverings and paints this year. There have also been surface sterilizers, antibacterial paint, a whole other segment.
Wow. Okay.
So how does this kind of a situation force a company like this to evolve?
Yeah, Manju, sorry.
No, I don't know much about business, so sorry.
No, I mean, I was going to put it to Amit.
Okay.
Okay. No, Manju, you know, as I see it, one of the biggest, I think, challenges was that, you know, at this point of time, there was no rule book, you know, so to say, that you could go to a rule book and say, okay, this is how I handle my consumer, this is how I handle my employee, and so on and so forth. Okay. And that was the interesting part in terms of what we looked at in terms of doing. So for instance, you know, today what we said is that, first of all, how do we kind of get the paranoia of the customer's mind? I think that's the biggest challenge in terms of what we wanted to kind of throw in, because, you know, everything was like non-touchable, literally. So I think the whole concept in terms of saying that there is something which is called a safe painting, okay, and there is something which is called, you know, that we could kind of come and sanitize your space so that you no longer need to worry in terms of, you know, what's really happening, and every time you're getting, you know, a sanitizer to wipe things and so on and so forth, to that extent. So I think we worked very strongly in terms of looking at this paranoia, and we launched something which is called a SaniSure service, which was a sanitization service for all surfaces. So literally, you know, you could kind of do it on your walls, any substrate, you know, and some finishes which would kind of sanitize the thing for anything from between 3 months and a year. So I think one of the big things which we thought we were able to change was getting this paranoia off. Okay. The second, I think the area which was very strong for us, which we really worked, was how do we kind of keep on keeping people happy and spreading joy. It was a time when, once in a while coming in the balcony and kind of enjoying your utensils is not something which is going to give them the happiness for life. Okay. So I think we looked at in terms of introducing what we call as a DIY range. Okay. And I think we kind of busted the myth in terms of saying that the Indian consumer will never kind of do stuff themselves. Okay. And we had such a strong success in terms of saying that people were literally decorating their walls, whether it was with stencils, whether it was really doing small photo frames, looking at tables and looking at, really doing something on the floor, on the wood. I think it was amazing to see in terms of the stories people were telling to us in terms of how they were looking at really, enhancing their home and spreading that happiness. And that was a time we really felt that, you could kind of at this point of time really coexist, with the environment in a very strong manner. And we changed the entire paradigm of saying, okay, guys, if you're not able to step out, we bring things at home for you. Okay. So the whole paradoxical change with respect to saying you don't step out, we bring things at home and really make you enjoy stuff at home and feel happy, so that life is not over. There is much more to the life, to the extent what you see other than just the digital world.
Okay, I wanna sort of wrap up this discussion about Habitat and by asking you, Alan, if is there a new space that the Bombay Greenway project has taken up, or what happens now in this sort of, as Amit put it, in this sort of fearful space where people are sort of worried about coming out? Is there another space that you guys are looking at working on, or is it paused for now?
No, it's very much on. So Bombay Greenway is specifically focused on Bombay. And they're not hypothetical projects, they're very real projects. So that's very much on. We've got about 60 projects, and very few of them have been executed. So we're still speaking to the government, trying to make things. Some of them are tweaks, some of them are big. That's one. Speaking about paints, I think colors make a huge difference. So people are, I think, I don't know, I wanted to really ask, what's the color of COVID? Is there a color given to COVID? that would be the color of 2020.
Yeah,
so we need to have a villain color. We need to have the villain color, right? So make sure it's not like.
I would say that, just a counter to it, the color of the COVID would be only a color of optimism.
I think
he wants to sell all his paints.
I think one of the strangest things about the color of the year for this year is the influence that the previous year has had. I don't think any other year we've spent so much time talking about the year that's gone by. So right. It's an interesting turn of events. Anyway, thank you so very much, Alan. I am going to bring Amit back now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving us time. Thank you. We're going to go back in and discuss the next trend. So trend number 2, Amit, if you'll come back in and then also introduce the keynote speaker for that.
Sure. Thanks, Manju. And back to, the second trend in terms of what we are looking at. And this trend is called a home new world. Okay. Let's kind of straight away look at the AV for this trend. Great. I think that was a whole new world for you in terms of what you say. This is a very, very unique trend. What we are saying is that today, home is all feeling like that the entire ecosystem, where the worlds that were otherwise separate are now colliding. So you're talking of literally two paradigms coming together in terms of what we are speaking. And in here, today, what we are saying is that a whole new world represents that the change in our behavior and how we relate to our home and workplaces is complete. So what we see is that the trigger here is obviously the whole work from home culture, which we have been seeing around, rather than, it's almost like the gig culture. There is a collision of the worlds off and on work in terms of what we clearly see. And the key words here are DIY, we talk of self-sustaining, we talk of adaptable, we talk of utilitarian. So I think these are kind of the words which would come to one's mind when you speak of this entire thing of the two worlds colliding with each other as we see today in terms of the scenario which we just saw. And in this trend, when you look at the color forecast, overall, the palette is very, very interesting. It is balanced in terms of looking at some pastels coming like Alliance and Soothing Silk, something to what is uplifting and positive, which we see the yellows and the aboli coming up, and also something which is cooling. So to that extent, there is definitely a note of positivity which comes in, a note of uplifting which kind of really comes in this palette very strongly as we kind of look at in terms of this thing. The whole area of the textures and patterns are something which is calming. It talks of simple geometry, and it is ergonomic and meditative in terms of the way it kind of really looks. So to that extent, whether it is the wallpaper which you see and or the royal play wall to floor kind of a finish, this is something, what is the texture and the pattern looking like when you look at this trend. When you look at design manifestations, very, very interesting. So no longer are, the two worlds apart, like the home is converting into saying that there are, any space is like a multifunctional space converting into a living room into an office, and therefore the entire world of, work and office remaining the same. Similarly, it is like going to a really, far off place as a destination to enjoy, where basically you really feel at home at the same time. At the same time, you are able to connect with work in a strong manner. So I think that's the kind of design manifestation which we see in terms of something which has been there now. And the second area here is something which, we have been doing ourselves in terms of looking at, office furniture, which is far more ergonomic, adaptive, modular, something which kind of really helps people working longer hours from home, something which is collapsible, something which kind of gives people the flexibility. And at the same time, people are able to save space, and it is an ergonomic kind of a solution which comes to people. The decor directions of this trend are very clear, simple, because these are like, you're approaching AMP and spaces literally, and talking of the whole concept of flexibility being the underlying backbone which comes in, where you see a lot of things which are modular, something which is utilitarian, and smart designs which kind of come in. So I think the whole area is of saying that how can we save the problems quickly, like we do in terms of a hack kind of a thing, and seeing that, the overall kind of decor is still kind of calm and positive, how it kind of looks like. So this is how it will translate in terms of how it kind of looks like. It is smart, comfortable, elegant, but modular, something which kind of really is multi-adaptive and so on and so forth. That's how the entire decor looks at. So that's the second trend, what I just spoke of, a home new world. And we have another keynote speaker now for you, Ekta Parikh, who's going to speak about post-COVID homes and space design. Over to Ekta.
Thank you, Amit. And thank you, Asian Paints, for having me on this platform. and for introducing one of your color trends. We can start the slideshow actually. So the year 2020 taught us a lot, right? But the two basic traits that were highlighted across humanity were basically resilience and adaptability. Over the next few minutes, I will attempt to reflect on these qualities in our work, past, present, and future. Next, please. So the home, as we know it, changed the most. In larger homes, things took on different manifestations. In smaller homes, they took on different forms. Next slide, please. In larger homes, people saw emphasis on things that were important to them. They were different for each person, different across platforms. Trying to carve out spaces on your floor plate, which I think Manju and Alan both hit upon a little bit in that talk, as the need to have green spaces. You couldn't step out, and as against just having a pot put in one corner of your living room, or having balconies with green spaces, actually emphasizing the need to actually carve out these spaces from within your homes to actually have lungs to breathe. Next slide, please. The dedicated study spaces. I mean, we've all struggled trying to find different connections in the home, different places to work. Of course, we're not equipped to have families with, husband, wife, kids, everybody working from home, to kind of actually now take that time to make that space, to put in a desk, to put in a space that you can close out and actually be able to function. Next slide, please. Discovering your passion. I mean, I think we've got enough friends and enough Instagram posts where people have been going nuts, trying to keep fit. So why not? I mean, have a space. If you have the luxury of space, give up something that's not as important to you, to put a gym in your house, a space to work out, a space which is quiet to do yoga. Next slide, please. And just some me time spaces sometimes, just hobby spaces where you'd like to sit and play the piano, places where you'd like to play the drums and not disturb other people, a wall in your house that you could rock climb on. Next slide, please. And of course, we had enough of our banana bread baker friends who discovered their passion. Some even turned it into small businesses, where this is sort of just a replicate image which shows, that you can do a bit of both, adding in a pantry, which became part of your living space, where you cooked and you were not confined to being within a closed space and cooking. Next slide, please. To actually doing a retrofit solution, where you actually had a closed up kitchen, but you could go in there, poke a hole into it, make a window, so that again, if you didn't have the luxury of pre-planning, you can actually open up the space again and have a little breakfast counter to be a part of conversations. Next. Of course, smaller homes meant multifunctional adaptive spaces. You didn't have the luxury of having one dedicated room to watching TV, so to speak. So you kind of have this combination of having sliding partitions, kind of closed off their screens, made them closed rooms so you didn't disturb the rest of the house. Next slide, please. Or actually, again, retrofitting indoors in a seemingly large living space where you felt that, yes, it's nice to have a living space, but it would be nice if I could cordon it off when I didn't want to kind of maybe house a parent who's going to come in and stay with you, or a quarantine situation that you didn't predict and didn't have the space for. Next slide, please. And this was a fun, actually, revelation where we were working on a large home, and as we do have separate, bathroom and walk-in wardrobe spaces for a couple typically, where this couple went through the lockdown, spending too much time together, which may not necessarily always be a good thing. And next slide, please. We actually landed up giving up the 2 bathrooms to actually compromise and having slightly smaller spaces, but having 2 independent bedrooms, realizing that they woke up in different sleep patterns, they watch TV at different times, but also having a lounge where they could kind of connect and do things together. So it was actually a fun sort of outcome of that. Next slide, please. And oddly enough, though we all worked from home, we at the studio managed to actually wrap up about 4 ongoing office projects, which was really hugely shocking because we never thought we would. Next slide, please. But certain things in those spaces changed. This was a large double height vestibule, which was for an office we finished recently. And it actually worked really well for these COVID environment spaces, because the entrance then became a space which was not confined and narrow, not too close to reception areas where people feel threatened, but actually breathable. Next slide, please. And also the other part of this large sort of vestibule space, which doubled up as meeting rooms, which may not have necessarily been planned for earlier, where you could actually come in and have a casual meeting, where you didn't have to take in somebody who came from outside the office, who you were not aware about their background in terms of sanitation, COVID history, all of that. And you just had a casual meeting in that larger space, so you didn't feel as threatened. Next slide, please. And then to actually having rooms with your own clique. You have, we had, these group of people who kind of worked within teams. So you had 4 people, 6 people, where actually those meeting spaces then became these closed out rooms where you actually worked with your teams, where you actually could take the mask off and exist, because God knows you can't sit with that mask for 6 hours, 8 hours a day. Next slide, please. And here, sort of reinventing old spaces that we had. This is our own studio, where we had actually done a cutout in the asbestos ceiling to kind of bring in natural light. It's an old warehouse space, so we needed the light in the floor plate. So this was done for that purpose. So right now, it sort of doubles up as a lunchroom. It's a space where people step out, enjoy the outdoors, take your mask off because you have to eat without a mask, and not feel threatened. Next slide, please. To the use of partitions and screens in various ways, not just screening off things that you want not visible, but actually being able to take these and move them around and create these enclosures of semi-private sort of meeting spaces, mainly to kind of keep extra people out. Next slide, please. And here we actually, it worked in a different way, where we've used this in an office where the air conditioning unit was actually placed on the outside rather than the inside. And there were lots of technical plus points of this, but the ones I'm going to emphasize on are the fact that your entire service team could actually come from the outside of the office and service it, because you're always worried about people who walk in and out, doing these maintenance jobs for you. Next slide, please. And I'd actually like to end by saying that not only were homes and workplaces affected, but this is something that is really close to our heart. While we worried about what lay ahead, the normalcy of life as we know it, whether we'll have enough work post-lockdown, whether we'll travel for work, whether schools will ever start, honestly, we were the privileged few who didn't have to deal with existential issues. This next project is something we're starting very, very soon. It's a shelter for street children in Barclay. It's currently a ground floor structure like the picture shows. It's not for orphans. These are kids who have parents, they just simply don't have a home. A very dear client of ours presided over this NGO and had a dream to accommodate more kids into this shelter. Currently, they accommodate 25, so that they would have a place to stay and sleep safely. So while the world came to a standstill last year, this client of ours worked endlessly to kind of get BMC permissions, so that today, when we go into construction, we actually have space for 125 kids as against 25. So for these kids, honestly, this home is and will be a whole new world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ekta. So I mean, thank you so much for taking us through these real life projects. I mean, it's so interesting. And I wanted to ask you about constraints. Do you have any clients who've come back to you who've already had projects finished, who've had to go through this year and found, had to negotiate all these different things, and have they come back to you asking for changes? And if they have, what are those kinds of changes?
Yes, they have. And I think one or two of those were those examples where you kind of retrofit like a window-like scenario. You give up a couple of cabinets of storage in your kitchen and poke out a window because, you realize that you're cooking as a family. You're doing things because you've not had help at home. The 2 bedrooms that I showed you, which developed, which was actually a fun, it's a large size home and they had the luxury to do that. But it's realizing that this is a pandemic that was of 2020, but the fact that we've gone through a pandemic is not necessarily that it's over, that we may not have one in the future. Not to portray a dismal picture, but who saw this coming, right? So why not plan for something where you can take care of these requirements? adjust, fine tune within the space that you have, whatever it may be, and make it work for you.
And I'm sort of curious. I mean, how has your work culture changed? How has your team been able to sort of function together on projects through this?
So I have to be very honest. We were probably, we started really, really early. I think we started our studio honestly in June, and it was just 4 of us partners who came in to work. We all luckily lived close enough and managed to come. But the kids at the studio have been fabulous. I mean, I think they worked really hard through the lockdown, and I think they were wanting to come into the studio. So I think what's worked very well is people have been carpooling, because we didn't want them to be unsafe and travel by public transport. So if somebody had a car and lived in Andheri, they picked up somebody from Juhu, from Barclay, kind of, which never happened earlier. I mean, we all kind of got into our own modes of transport and did what we had to do. It's like this. You became more considerate. We had 2 Kunes who lived with us here. One who was from Nalasopara, another one who was from like really, really far. I couldn't even remember. But so we luckily have the space outside the studio where you have a bathing facility. But one of our drivers lives close by, and his wife was out of work because she was working home to home. So she actually started a tiffin service for a lot of these people who came into the office and stayed. So I think it served at various levels at micro environments. I mean, you adapted as human behavior and made it work.
And the Barclay project, when is that scheduled to finish?
Oh, it's about starting now. So, which is great because it was shelved through COVID. I mean, nobody was doing anything. BMC offices were obviously occupied doing firefighting more than anything else. But at least we have people, donors in place. We have, of course, it's a complete non-profit job. We've all taken time out from what we do to make this happen. So it's great to have people in place who have been wanting to put money down to see it happen. So hopefully we go into construction in a month's time and get these kids a home as soon as possible.
So which, for people who don't know, during this last 1 year, AP announced its entry into completely new categories: furniture segment, lighting, beautiful home service, and integrated end-to-end design service. Now, these are all sort of again, changes that came about due to the pandemic. And Amit, I wanted to ask you, how do you see that this sort of changes that came about in the lifestyle, work culture, home culture, how does that affect the way one ends up the kind of designs for products, the kind of designs that people have been asking to do, for services? What kind of impact has it had especially on these new businesses over this last 1 year?
Yeah, Manju, I think, the whole pandemic changed your outlook in terms of what you wanted to kind of do. And, as I was earlier saying, the whole area of at home became very important. And within that at home, we said that when you look at now, homes are changing very, very strongly. While the connectedness with the homes has really gone up, people are looking at homes as multifunctional places so that they are serving both the purpose of home and office at the same time, kind of a thing. So I think when we stepped into this world, what we were kind of looking at is saying that, how is it that we can give people something which is multi-modular, something which is ergonomic at the same time, and something which can be adaptable, flexible in terms of how it comes back. So it's almost like saying that there is a table which kind of really works in such a manner that you could do a Zoom call sitting as well as standing, literally. And then you could kind of fold it up and it could be used as a reverse table for playing or eating. So I think a lot of thought went in really in terms of how do you kind of really adapt to the situation and give to people what they want. And especially, we kept in a lot of cases the mind that, Mumbai homes are smaller and how people can really kind of fit a lot of things there without really, upsetting their lifestyle and what they're doing. So I think similarly with respect to even lighting in terms of what we looked at, furnishing, we looked at smart ways in terms of what we could hold the people's eye. At the same time, it had a design element to it, which makes you feel happy. At the same time, it is comfortable, but you feel that the modularity gives you a whole new flexibility. So I think those were the key themes which we kept in mind in terms of looking at this launch when we did it.
Okay, so where I'm gonna move us along to the next trend. Thank you so much, Ekta, for sharing your practice and examples from your practice with us. Amit, I'm gonna ask you to jump back in now to introduce trend number 3.
Yeah, thanks, Ekta, again, and Manju. Back on to the trend now, which is the third design trend I'm going to speak of. This is called Felicity. And let's jump into the AV directly. Great. So what you just saw was, a peep into what the trend Felicity is all about. For us, Felicity reflects a change in the behavior, a conscious choice which people are making to consume things that possess real value over a flaunt value. And this is something which is what we define as a luxury trend to that extent. And we think that today, even in the luxury trend, it's not only about just saying that we need to kind of flaunt things, but it has to have a certain value. So therefore, indulgence really takes a backseat as we surround ourselves with things that serve a purpose, are beautiful, and provide us with a lasting sense of comfort. So if you look at the genesis, the trigger here has been the change in the conversation on consumerism, changing priority over real value over the show value. As you see it, sorry. So when we look at the overall key words here, which come to mind is conscious consumerism. We look at design for longevity and look at honesty and transparency as some of the key words which would kind of come to mind when you look at the entire design trend. The palette is obviously very, very interesting in terms of what you see. There are some mid-tones, the tones which are also coming in between. It talks, and there are some timeless shades which are, so the concept of timeless, some classic shades, a sense of contentment which comes in. It gives you a restful kind of an experience, and it is reminiscent. So I think that's the kind of palette which you see, which is really great in terms of what really pops up in terms of looking at it. And when you go on to the, the textures and the patterns, these are very, very different. The patterns literally have something what I would call a vintage vibe and are reminiscent of the, the real classic times. So if you look at the Gokul Pichwai, which has been designed by Sabyasachi, it's really something which is amazing in terms of giving us a very, very strong vintage vibe, but it looks really classy in terms of the way it has kind of come in. So that's how your text and patterns would kind of look like in terms of this thing. When you look at design manifestation, some very interesting examples here. When you look at, some of the stuff which is, the SAR studio, and it's called Rituals. It's a collection of, literally everyday objects, that serve the Indian heritage and identity in tune with our really early habits. But I think the way it has been kind of done, the material which has been used, the way the ergonomics are, it's very, very simple. It's not really flaunting really a high value thing, but it comes and gives a true value given the material and the finish in terms of what really comes in. And therefore, I think it is a perfect example in terms of what really, real value would mean really to even a customer who's looking at the high end. The second example here is from our very own stable when you look at the whole concept of Sabyasachi fabrics. So when you look at this chair which is there, the fabric which has been done is kind of takes the pichwai into its basis in looking at that is what is inspired by, and it is really a classic pattern, draped on a modernistic furniture, and therefore looks very, very contemporary, and therefore to a customer it really kind of gives a real value in terms of coming from a certain vintage, from a certain vibe which it kind of gives about Indian art and culture. So I think that's the area in terms of where it touches your heart. Going on to the looking at the decor direction, which this trend is speaking of. The decor direction is very, very simple. It is all about lifestyle and aesthetics in a strong way. At the same time, what we are saying is that it is something which is a design for longevity. There are no frill spaces, essentially essential spaces, but layered, a mix of modern and curated vintage. So I think it is all about spaces which are telling a story and creating an experience to live. So that's how I think the overall decor directions really come in, and that's how the overall decor would really look very strong in terms of what it really lives, and gives a very strong value nuance which comes in, but really up-end luxury in terms of what it really shows. So that's the overall trend for you, Felicity. Now we move on to our next speaker, Samuel Barclay, who is going to speak about celebration of design in everyday objects. Over to Samuel.
Thanks, Amit. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you, Manju, for moderating this with us. If we want to jump into the slides, we can start there. So in addition to our architecture practice, case design, over the last few years, we've been kind of cultivating this brand of furniture, lights, objects. We've just started to get into textiles as well. But before I show some of that, I wanted to just look at this word felicity for a second. I'm sort of big into etymology, and I like the idea of kind of understanding the roots of a word. If you want to go to the next one. So the first definition of felicity, can you change the slide? Yeah, one more. Is this notion of intense happiness, which is lovely to think about from a design point of view. The second one, however, is one I didn't know about, and that's the ability to find appropriate expression for one's thoughts. And for me, that's a fantastic segue into the world of design. I feel like it's kind of our mandate as designers, whether we're creating something, a series of spaces for a client, whether we're doing something that's meaningful or impactful for ourselves. And this is, these are some of the earlier pieces of case goods, and I'm going to show a couple of different ones of what we've been working on more recently. But again, we try and create objects that are simple, beautiful, and most importantly, functional. And that are, if I go back to that statement, they're an appropriate expression of one's thoughts. And so these are early manifestations of those. If you can go to the next slide. As most of you probably know, we work a lot with artisans, craftsmen of all different kinds, from weavers and textiles to carpenters, masons. Obviously in the architectural realm, we interact with a lot of people in the building trades. And so the image on the right sort of talks about how we go from an idea, a sketch, a conversation, it becomes a prototype, it becomes a full-scale operational mock-up, and then you start to make these and go into a production realm. And as I said early on, we worked a lot with timber, a little bit with brass, some stone work as well. You can go to the next slide. But for me, that notion and something that Amit had touched on earlier, this idea of the role of the maker, not just as a sort of means of production, but as a way to engage in a dialogue. What we do architecturally, obviously, is greatly impacted by the people who are making these things. But for us, that really translates into the product realm as well. We're very, very deeply integrated into workshop culture. literally 50% of our studio is workshop and 50% of it is sort of more standard studio space, which ends up seeing a lot of models made and things like that as well. And so our engagement with these people who are producing the things that we're conceiving of together has been a really integral part of our practice, not just in the architecture and design side, but also into as we go deeper into the product realm. Next slide. And what we've done recently, especially with throughout the pandemic, we've done a lot of designs for things and that have kind of been backed up in the queue. Our goal for the next 6 months is to release a new product every month as we sort of move from now towards Diwali. We've got some exciting things on the horizon. I just wanted to talk about a couple that we put out towards the end of last year and then coming out now in the last few months. So this is what we call Deep. It's two oil lamps that are made in solid brass. They have a reservoir on the inside. And again, going from a design to a sketch to a prototype to production, engaging with the people that we're making these with. These are made very close to and finally assembled and checked and shipped directly out of our studio. So brass is a material we're obviously very comfortable in working with, and it's something that we're quite facile in going through that design and iterative process. And yeah, these, as I mentioned, came out just in the last few months, and they've done quite well. One of the projects we've had running for a longer duration is, as I mentioned before, diving into the world of textiles. India produces over 90% of the world's jute. And so we started looking at that as a kind of exploration of natural fibers, from the weaving techniques to the processes of dipping and dyeing. And we wanted to produce something that comes from a completely organic place. You can see Dwani here in the foreground. She's really the designer, did all of the R&D. We worked with an NGO from Andhra Pradesh on the natural pigments. So again, relying on local knowledge, know-how to really inform and drive our process. And then we became the kind of conductors of that orchestra, ultimately making decisions about how those things would get resolved. So Dwani has spent really the last sort of 15 to 18 months doing a deep dive into this process, going to these places where the fibers are turned into yarns, the yarn is turned into a textile or a mat, these dharis, and then developing the process through which these are folded and dyed to achieve the kind of bold graphic designs that she sought out. Obviously, the designs have changed as we go through this process. What's achievable? What are the implications? This is a natural indigo. The other colors that we used are from pomegranate peel and from madder root. And so looking at how not just those patterns are made from the various sort of origami folding techniques, but also the implications of what happens when they overlap. So obviously when you overlap the blue and the yellow, you get this green intersection, and then that informs basically a third color. Next slide, please. And so looking at how those, again, these natural processes, when this product has sort of given its life, it can literally be buried in the garden. It's 100% jute, it's 100% natural pigments. And so we found that as people are focusing more and more on their personal spaces, more and more also, as Amit said, on this idea of conscientious consumption, it's something that's really gaining a lot of traction, and we've had good results both here in India and also as we start to export these out to the rest of the world. It's something that people are very, very happy to have in their home, this kind of natural material and an understanding of the narrative and where it's come from and the sort of people and processes that have brought about that engagement. I think that's the last.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. So I'm going to ask you a two-part question. One, your practice has always been about conscious choices, right? You've always, both in your residential work and in your products, you've always believed in it. And you just said that there has been a higher, you've seen a sort of more of an acceptance now. So I want to know whether it has been an easier sell to a new client now, because these, well-crafted products are not cheap products. The second part of my question is, you've also had a varying array of products. So how do you decide on what kind of material or product to explore? Because there's so much out there in India. So what decides that?
Sure. I think those are two great questions. I think one is that early on, especially because I had this relationship, again, that sort of carryover from architectural practices. I had a relationship with carpenters. I had a relationship with stoneworkers. Even the brass work, things like that, a lot of it was through engagement with carpenters. And so a lot of the very early material choices and even the products were simply a kind of ease of means. But out of that grew, we started to build a catalog, a collection of different things. A lot of the early ones also came as a result of things that we needed for projects, or simply things that we wanted to have for ourselves. And so in that sense, it was a little bit intuitive. It was not very strategic, I'll just be very honest. But what we did realize was that we wanted, we are very interested in craft. We are very interested in providing a sort of platform for artisans of all different kind of, in all different sort of medium, to explore these things. And also within our studio, it's about pursuing our own passions. So Dwani, the woman that I mentioned, who's there on the slide, this was something that came about out of her interest. We had a sort of moment, we were doing an exhibition in Antwerp. We had a moment, we needed a carpet, literally in the parking lot. She painted it, colored it using natural pigments from an architectural project we were doing. And it became a prototype that inspired us, and we pursued over the next, like I said, year and a half to try and find this sort of longer sustaining process. So a lot of it comes out of sort of our interests as much as what we think might do well in the market.
And about whether it's been an easier sell to consumers.
I think consumers are moving in that direction naturally. I definitely think that as people care more about the world and the environment that they live in, whether because they're forced to because of, a pandemic, or because of, wildfires that are attacking Australia or California, or, other kinds of drought related things, people are going to be forced to care about the implications of their choices more and more. And so I think I agree that sell is becoming easier, but we're in a position where we're trying to offer an alternative. We're not trying to, we do preach this to other designers because I think it's the right thing to do, but from the point of view of putting things out into the world, we just try to offer a viable alternative. And the doris also are something where we're trying to produce them in a way that is a lower entry point. It's more, it might still be an aspirational product, and it's, I wouldn't describe them as low cost by any means, but we are trying to make them more accessible to a broader range.
Okay. So Sam, you and Amit sort of represent, sort of not David and Goliath, but certainly two extreme ends of the spectrum. So I want to, and Amit has been a huge evangelist internally of conscious design. So Amit, I want to ask you, how do you apply that as a strategy to a large company like Asian Paints?
Yeah, Manju, I think that's that's tricky really in terms of when you look at, because on one side you're looking at mass production in terms of what you want. At the same time, you're looking at delivering value in terms of what really comes to the top. So I think we've been playing a very strong part where, as I said, that at the luxurious end, we are talking of saying that it's not something which is always looking good. So it's not about something which really, when I see a wall and say, wow, this is something which is looking good and the finish is like very great. what we look at clearly is that what are the attributes of design, what are the attributes of other values which you can put into that finish, which really kind of conveys the value to the customer even at the top end. So for instance, when we look at a product which is coming in from the point of view of giving a very good finish is something which is looking at, looking very good in terms of the colors we offer and so on and so forth. The element which we would kind of really like to convey people is possibly, say, the value of durability. The value that it would last you for 10 years, the value of anti-crack. There are some of those parameters which you would like to kind of bring into the flavor. Even the whole value of something being tactile, so that you are able to kind of really convey that it's just not about the look, it's about the sensorial look in terms of what you would kind of really convey of a finish. So I think that really becomes a task, and one is creating it, the other is selling it. I think both are very, very big challenges in terms of what it creates. But having said that, that is something which is a motto we have, and we keep on really exploring newer, higher end products with more and more value in it, so that we are able to kind of take the brand forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Sam, for this felicitous conversation with us.
My pleasure.
Amit, I'm going to let you take over for introducing the last trend.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Manju. Thanks, Sam. I think I will quickly kind of look at the last and the final trend. I think it is a very exciting one, which is there. So this trend is called the Z Futures as we see it, and it's a very interesting trend. Let's jump into the AV right away for this. Great. I'm sure that it's brought some energy in. This something is, yes, definitely, a younger trend in terms of what we see. It gets in lots of energy, and, this trend is obviously inspired by, the Gen Z. So I think Z Futures clearly is about the self-assured, liberal, fluid attitude of the Gen Zs, and it's really, the youthful spirit, of adventure mixed with calm of domestic cozy, which really brings it in a very strong manner. Obviously, the trigger is, the coming of age of Gen Z who have been raised in political, social, and economic instability, and they have access to comfort, education, digital, technology, everything. And they have a very, very different attitude in terms of how they look at overall, what design means to them. So what we say is that this whole trend, some of the key words when we look are, something which is being authentic, something which is community over competition, something about being self-assured, and justice and fairness. So I think those are the clear things which come to you when you kind of look at this trend. And therefore, the palette also is a little bit perky and bright in terms of what you see. There is the candy floss pink, which is coming in, and the orange spark orangish yellow, which is coming into the zone. Obviously, it has the little bit of the tech colors in terms of the white and the gray kind of seeping into the whole forecast, which makes it, authentic, inclusive, fluid, tolerant, fearless, and mature. So that's how I think I would describe that, how the entire palette is looking. When you look at the texture and patterns here, obviously the texture and patterns are informal, There are casual patterns which come in, crisscross hatches which kind of come into that extent, and therefore there's a degree of informality which kind of comes in, which also throws the authenticity in the game in terms of what they are all about. So that's how the texture and patterns look like. The design manifestation again comes in from the whole area of looking at caring and looking at responsibility. And therefore, one of the interesting optics here is that this is something which has been designed by Samsara, the recycle company, which is looking at design and manufacturing something which is coming up from the waste materials to that extent, and exploration of the plastic waste streams which are coming to see that they are able to generate something which is very comfortable, at the same time recycled from the plastics. So I think that's one example which comes in. The second again comes in from our own stable in terms of where we have looked at dyed cotton lamps which have been made from natural mango wood and dyed cotton threads and shaded from off-white to blue. And these are lamps which look contemporary, and they have been done on an indigo dyed cotton kind of a zone. So I think looks very strong from the authenticity point of view in terms of how they have been brought to the fore. Overall decor directions again are fairly simple. It's a modern, very thrifty kind of a decor. No rules kind of followed in terms of the spaces are fluid. And products designed are for good objects and displays. One's, they take pride in one's roots. So I think it's pretty flexible in terms of the overall, the way decor looks. But it still kind of is very comfortable, something which is authentic, and still looks kind of good in terms of when we look at the overall decor. So I think that's the last trend which I spoke of, is the future. We have one of the keynote speakers now, whom I will hand over to, Chaitanya Dixit, who's going to speak about decoding Gen Z's unique aesthetics. So over to Chaitanya.
Hey guys, Chaitanya Dixit this side. I'll first start off by introducing myself. My name is Chaitanya Dixit. I'm known as Che, C-H-E. My company is called Che Labs. Don't search about it. You're not going to find it. It's not even registered yet. I make shoes. If you can just show the slides, I can tell you about what I do and how I do. Yeah. So I make shoes. I customize shoes. So the pair that you see on your screen right now is a pair of shoes that I've customized, I think, for Katrina Kaif, which had this artworks by a lot of people. You can just stop the slide over there, just talk about it, and then get on to the next one. Yeah. So these ones are all made for private clients, and all my shoes that I make are all for private clients. And the design language in all of them differ from every shoe that I make. So for this one, I went on to a little more a vintage or more past influence on these by taking references from classic artists known as classic artists like Jean-Michel Basquiat, Andy Warhol, and using their artworks and incorporating them on the shoe to give it a modern twist. The next slide. So these ones are, this is a brand new pair of shoes, just made to look like a vintage pair of shoes. So this is something, a new aesthetic that a lot of people have been following and getting on, is the whole vintage trend. A lot of the whole aesthetic that all of us right now, my generation, is following is vintage, and vintage is the wave right now that everybody's been riding. Anything vintage has a lot of value, from artifacts to clothes to shoes. It's something that everybody's wearing. So this pair of shoe was a brand new pair that somebody gave me and told me to make them look like they've been they're right out of 1985. So this pair of shoe is an Air Jordan 1, which is Michael Jordan's first shoe. So somebody gave me a new pair of these and told me to make them look like the pair that Michael Jordan himself had in 1985. So somebody wanted me to make the pair look like it's a 35-year-old pair of shoe. So if you say it like that, it sounds pretty dumb, but the whole idea behind of it being vintage and looking vintage and having that worn out look, and it adds a little more character to it, and also it just makes sure that it has a story to it. Like a 1985 shoe, I mean, it won't last till now. All pairs from 1985 just crumble. But just this pair looking like the 1985 in the same condition, but just the look of it, looking like it from 35 years ago, is something that people love a lot. Again, similarly, the same idea down to a pair of Nikes again. So a lot of people from my generation love modern art and abstract art. And for example, like one of the favorite artists for me and my friends and everyone around is Basquiat, Andy Warhol, Keith Haring. And these are some of the artists who have like, who are from like a very, they're from long time back from the 90s, but they still, the amount of character and stuff that their artwork used to carry is something that we appreciate a lot. And because it speaks out to us, it's something that shouts out and something that retaliates. Because Jean-Michel Basquiat himself, being a black man in the 80s, used to speak a lot, and that's something that we get inspired from. And like, it helps us and kind of motivates us to be better and speak up for ourselves. The next slide. Again, this is a pair that is commemorated to one of the late rappers who recently passed away. So even hip hop culture plays a very, very, very big role in how we influence everything around us. So this is a pair made to commemorate memory of a late rapper, Pop Smoke, who recently was shot. And yeah, this is the pair that I made for like in memory of him. Next slide. This is a pair of shoes made to look like the Bruce Lee, like made to look like Bruce Lee's uniform with the whole 3 claw marks on the side. With yeah, it has like 3 claw marks on the side to get that ripped kind of a vibe, and the yellow and the black to represent his uniform and the thing that he wore. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the aesthetic that my generation has been carrying is mostly thrifted, vintage, inspired by the past, or something which is too futuristic, which is morely techwear and stuff like that, like technological stuff. The next slide. So this shoe is like one of the most iconic ones that I've made till now. This one's called the Nike Air Jordan 1 Jaipur Pink, which is inspired by the city of Jaipur, the Pink City. This pair was made for the owner of Super Kicks, which is a sneaker store in Bombay. And the inspiration from the pair was, obviously taken from the Pink City, Jaipur, which is called the Pink City in India. The next slide. This was inspired by tie-dye, which is like tie-dye or bandhani, which is like a very old method of dyeing clothes and stuff. And the whole pattern has been inspired by that and put on the shoe. The next slide. This shoe has been inspired by the anime culture that a lot of, again, my generation follows, which is cartoons, but Japanese cartoons. And the pair is supposed to, is made to look like it's from a Japanese anime, which is, I mean, it looks unreal when you see them in person too, like the whole shadows, the lines and everything like that. It's just made to look like it's unrealistic. But in real life, it actually looks like this. Next slide. Same Basquiat pair done again. Next slide. This pair of shoe was hand embroidered and hand cut and everything by me. It's made to show a skeletal diagram of your foot on the shoe, just to give it like an amplified look and have a little grunge look to it. Grunge again is one emotion. Grunge again is one aesthetic that a lot of the Gen Z people follow, which is like dark colors, more like gray black tones, and has a more grungy look to it. Gray, creams, black, some of those colors. Next slide. So this is one of the paintings that I've made recently. This one's called Sincerity is Scary. And it just has a lot of poppy colors and stuff like that. I'm a fan of bright colors and how they all go together. But again, this has a very dark vibe to it and also has like a more grungier look. And the next slide is again a painting by me, which is called The Princess of Nothing, The Queen of Nothing, which is again a painting made by me. And it has like the story of a queen. And the painting just signifies fake entitlement and how it's a whole long story. I rather not explain that. But yeah, the painting is called The Queen of Nothing. It's just based on fake entitlement. And yeah, so it's just made to show that the whole grungy look that I myself follow a lot of grunge, vintage, and thrifted kind of vibe in the whole vibe and aesthetic that I have. Next slide. This painting has been inspired by one of the murals by. It's inspired by a painting called The Murals. The next slide. I think
Thank you. Sorry. There seems to be an echo. Okay. Chaitanya, I was just wondering about your process. I mean, you mentioned grunge, vintage, thrifted, which are sort of, referencing older things, but at the same time, authenticity is something that this generation really values. So how do you take some of these older references and then how are you able to kind of update it? Because, we're also working with so much imagery around us, right? So how do you do that?
Also, like most of my inspiration comes from what's around me and my surroundings, and I pick up inspiration from there and try to modulate them myself and come up with a new idea. And yeah, I mean that's all about it. Like most of my ideas are all inspired by the past or the future.
Okay. And Amit, Asian paints, having been around for so many decades, at the end of the day have had to adapt to generation after generation. How does a company so big do that? I suppose this kind of a research is also part of that effort, but how do you keep the ball rolling?
Yeah, Manju, that's really interesting because, it's a difficult task because there are so many micro consumer segmentations which are emerging today. So you keep on kind of really balancing whether, a company of our size should be only running after the mass, the bigger consumer segments which are there and concentrate there. But what I feel very strongly is that these micro segmentations are like trends which become bigger as we kind of go ahead. And if we don't keep our, nose and eyes onto this, I think we will get lost. And therefore, I think one of the big things which we do is that we clearly look at possibly digital as a very strong medium, social media as a very strong medium in terms of looking at getting at these micro segments and look at niche marketing coming in here to kind of get into this segments in a strong way. At the same time, we put groups and, a larger kind of people coming together, doing something very specific. So it is exciting so that what we can create. So, I was really amazed by what Chase has really created. And, I think that's the stuff which we should be doing more if we are able to kind of get into the niche consumers and really market them well, because this will really keep the brand young as we kind of go ahead.
Thank you so much, Amit. Thank you so much, Chaitanya. That comes to the end of the presentations of the 4 trends for 2021. And now we're moving on to a key moment for us, which is the introduction of the color of the year. So I'm going to invite Amit to take us onward for the rest of the presentation.
Sure. Thanks, Manju, and thanks, Chase. This is really exciting because we were all wondering that, given the year, what it has been, what should be the color, how do we kind of really energize people? What is that color which people should look forward to? And therefore, I think that is something which we kind of really brainstormed, and we said that, is there a color which really captures the essence of all the 4 stories? Is there a color which possibly is currently sensing the mood of the nation? And that is something which we should kind of really embrace. And something which can really talk of imagining a better world as we kind of look at, given the fact that we've gone through a time which is really amazing in terms of what has really happened. And therefore, I think we looked at something which is what we said is that cherish is the color of the year, 2021. A color that is, according to us, which is nurturing, humble, and fresh. You see the color right up there on the screen, which is there. Color which is giving us a sense of balance, not too cold, not too warm. Color which heals and revitalizes and gets us in the mood. A color which allows room for growing. So I think there are a lot of attributes in terms of what we really looked at in terms of what the color should be saying, and the fact that the color should also kind of get into a zone where it is talking of like a pale mint hue which is coming, which is soft, mellow out of this and restful. A color which is muted, but holds the power to be calming and rejuvenating, which is required now. A color which has a soothing appeal, really. So I think a color which is breathing life into spaces is in terms of what we are looking at it. Let's look at the AV of the color of the year.
As we step into a new decade, let's experience the present. Embracing every little joy in a whole new way. For what's life if we don't let the magic of now nurture us? A peaceful green symbolizing balance, like the soft blooming of life. A humble breeze, the comfort of a quiet ocean. The transience of life, its fleeting joy woven into this hue. A fresh punch of minty dew to live, love, and cherish all that is and will be.
I hope you're all excited on this color. I am definitely very, very kind of overjoyed to see this color. This color is really something which epitomizes for me. It is a humble color. It is responsive. It is holistic in its whole sense. And it's something which is really motivational in terms of how it gets. So Cherish is the color of the year in terms of what we are speaking. Once now having seen the color of the year, let's also see in terms of what is going to be the wallpaper of the year. Yes, I think that's another big thing which really comes to our mind, and something which can be really very different, something which we will celebrate this year, the next year about. This is a very, very different kind of a wallpaper which really drapes your walls like the saris. It is a Jaipur Gemini by Sabyasachi. So I think that's the color we are talking of, which let's quickly look at the wallpaper of the year, AV.
The past speaks like a love letter. And walls whisper tales of myths and memories, casting their spell in twilight hues. Madhumalti, jade, amaltas, a beauty that lives on. Asian Paints Nilaya present Jaipur Gemini Wallpaper of the Year 2021 by Sabyasachi.
Yes, Jaipur Gemini for all of you. This is the wallpaper of the year. Really reminiscent of the glorious past, reminds you in terms of, the painted chintz, the gardens, the whole area of ornate palace architecture, those royal tents which come in to that extent, something which really looks brilliant. And if you look at on the image on the left-hand side, clearly a wallpaper which is with those royal stripes and those patterns below, which is literally like draping the walls with the sari. So that's Jaipur Gemini wallpaper of the year. And that's all from me. And I hope you enjoyed the entire Design Trends presentation and the design trends of the year, the color of the year, and the wallpaper of the year. So thanks everyone, and over to Manju.
Thank you. Thank you, Amit. We had 4 very different practitioners this afternoon with us. We're so grateful. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Ekta, Sam, Chaitanya. We saw this wide spectrum of practices from around the country. We looked at the 4 trends. Like I said at the beginning of this session, this is a really important moment for us. So we really appreciate all of you spending your Sunday afternoon with us and the effort that it took, from buildings to fantastic creative shoes. I mean, we covered it all. So thank you so much. And with the hope that we all meet in IRL soon, I will sign off on behalf of all of us at Asian Paints. Thank you. Thank you, ID. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you, Manju. Thank you.